Hello, I'd like to show you a brief presentation on wind energy. What are the issues? This is intended to be a brief presentation. The slides are available as a PDF file. If anyone would like to ask questions, then by all means, email me or get in touch and we'll try and help you. These issues relate to a number of things. Democracy and planning is one. And I'm not going to go through these bit by bit. But what I do, I think a lot of them are self-explanatory. Some of them, I think you really need to delve into great detail to understand what is going on here and here, because government is setting up policy to ensure wind farms are consented. And they are ignoring their own experts. They are ignoring evidence of harms. And they are acting at the behest of the renewables energy industry. And if you think that's an exaggeration, I'm sorry, but we have the minutes of meetings and ministers' brief that actually bears that out. Economic impacts, I think most of those will be familiar with you. Again, some of these, property devaluation, they're not the slightest bit interested. They'll deny it. There's no impact on property prices. Well, again, we've got good evidence. London School of Economics study says there is. So all of these points, we have got the information to back up. But in the case of being brief, we're just going to skip through them now. Environmental and health issues. This is where it gets quite technical. There are emissions, plastics emissions from the blades and from service work. Those contain chemicals which are a threat to human fertility and fetal gender development. And that might explain a lot of the transgender issues, gender dysmorphia, etc., that we're seeing our news full of day to day. They do emit infrasound. They do emit what's called pulse width modulation. That's the up and down variation in the noise volume, that sort of pulsing effect. Shadow flicker, fairly familiar, but these are being overlooked at the moment in planning. No, they're not interested. Yeah. In fact, impacts on human health are scoped out. That's from official scoping reports from Welsh Government. We've got insufficient separation distances. They're building these things too close to homes. And why? Well, because if they built them at proper separation distances, they could not build them in the vast majority of Wales. And that's not good enough for Welsh Government. They are ignoring damage to irreplaceable habitat. Peat is a carbon sink. The oceans, well, it's one thing saying, oh, well, yeah, a few whales will die. There's a lot of whales dying off the coast of the United States as a result of wind farm development and the surveying. There's a license take sheet for this, it's on public record. But worst case, we're poisoning our food chain. We want to eat those fish at some point, and they're no good to us, full of microplastics and heavy metal pollution. There's changes to vegetation. You can see this now in aerial views of some wind farms, and it's the first sign of problems with the ecosystem. There's displacement of wildlife during construction. It won't come back. There's also mortality. Operating turbines kill birds, bats, insects, and marine mammals. We talked about infrasound before. A lot of the whale deaths are being explained away as, oh, it's a ship strike. Yes, it's a ship strike because you've deafened the whale by pile driving, and a deaf whale can't avoid a ship. So it can't hunt, can't communicate, can't navigate, can't avoid a ship. So, guess what? Further on in our consultation, very poor. The quality of staff, these are PR droids that turn up. There's very few senior decision makers available to ask a sensible question. And if you do, then either they won't answer you or they don't have the answer. And then they'll start discrediting you. And you may even get threats. I've had them. Won't be the first or last time, I'm sure. They will try and downplay every impact. I can show you an environmental statement where I am utterly convinced they've taken the worst factor in each chapter and simply made it disappear. There's commercial pressure on the consultants. They're not independent. They're working for the wind farm developer, and they are under pressure, not least because they want the next job. It's worth hundreds of thousands to them. We get insufficient time to consider the documents, and we get a very brief lead time for freedom of information requests or to put in a legal challenge. But there are some positives because, the efficiency and reliability of energy in these projects is questionable. There are additional infrastructure costs. Now, let's look at this. Transport and access logistics glossed over. There's a lot of moving parts that have to all synchronize to make this project happen. And really, like so many things in this, it's what something will come along. It'll be all right on the night. That's the kind of attitude. And it's not good enough. Some cases, they can't build these things because the supply chain has fallen to pieces. You cannot get grid scale transformers at the moment, and likely not for another 4 or 5 years. Costs are rising all the time. Investor confidence is waning. And what I would say, and this is by way of encouragement, consent is not necessarily the same as construction. In other words, every step of the way, if this is reviewed under financial viability, then it may not actually go ahead, even if planning permission is given. We've got problems in the enforcement and accountability. Basically, local planning authorities are stripped to the bone. Where I live, they used to have 6 professional planning officers. Now they have 1. They don't have the specialist knowledge to enforce the 30 to 40 planning conditions that are being associated with every wind farm consent. But a lot of these regulations are set by the industry. There's either no regulation at all, or in the case of noise, that was set up as a set of rules that they could easily satisfy. So they would get compliance. There's false claims in here, utterly false. These are approved by Health and Safety Executive. Well, yes and no. The HSE approval is kind of aimed at making sure that their workers don't die. That's about it. They don't protect us. And to say the wind turbine is approved by Health and Safety Executive is an outright lie. I've spoken to Health and Safety Executive, and they have made that point in those words. Bullying tactics. We've had farmers bullied, we've had people like me threatened, campaigners, professors discredited their careers. I'll give you an example. David Bellamy. David Bellamy stood up against the green blob. Look what happened. But at ground level, a lot of information we simply do not get. If we ask a question, no, you can't have that. Or More often than not, you simply get ignored. Uh, I've tried getting information out of Vestas and Siemens Gamesa. They just ignore it. There's nothing. Long-term issues. Well, replacement cycles. So let's explain replacement cycles. They're talking about a 35 to 40 year lifetime for a wind farm with a product that's rated for 20 years. So at some point, things are going to wear out and they're going to need replacing. That's the replacement cycle. So in a 40-year lifetime, there will be at least one replacement cycle and probably two, whereby blades, gearboxes, generators will need changing. They'll need carrying up to site. The whole process will go again. The foundations may be okay. They'll be subject to survey. Whether they last the course remains to be seen. The decommissioning proposals, well, it's literally guesswork. Well, we don't really know what's going to be there. We don't know what we're going to have to deal with. There's no at-scale recycling for blades. You hear stories, oh, we can cut them up and make them into bus shelters. We can burn them and use them to make cement. But there's nothing at the scale required. 135,000 tons of blades going out of service in the UK over the next 10 years. Our recycling capability is about 1,000 to 2,000 tons per year. Why is it so small? Because it's not commercially viable. So you won't see a lot of people rushing to say, oh, let's start a business recycling wind turbine blades. It's expensive. It's subject to regulation. And frankly, the money isn't available to do it. Cumulative toxicity. So all the time, these toxins are building up. They don't go away. They continue building up to the point where the ecosystem fails completely. So no animal life, no plant life. That's what we're heading for if we're not careful. Conclusion. Well, wind energy is not a good solution. I think all of us will agree with that. Technically, it's inferior. Precious resources are being wasted building it, and we are being gaslighted. Now, what does that mean exactly? To cause a person to doubt their judgment, memory, or sanity through the use of psychological manipulation. That's from the manufacturers, the developers, and worse, by our councils and governments, by those specifically charged to protect us. This is unacceptable. Thank you for listening.